Over the last 2 years, we have found a great many things using Google Earth Pro that cannot be explained by artifacts of photography or wind, ice, rock, and snow. On the left, the Pentagon network that started in Brazil and moved all over the world. All of those locations cannot be a coincidence. All of the things that we found in Antarctica, the hundreds of locations, cannot be a coincidence. But today, I have found something that ties the two together in a way that we haven't been able to before. I have had this very crazy notion in my mind for a long time that I've never shared. I truly believe the entire native inhabitants of what we call the Western Hemisphere, North America, the Native Americans, the South Americans, their native roots all started in Antarctica when Antarctica wasn't covered in ice and was still connected. Now, many of you have heard the story of Gondwana, the supercontinent. There's evidence for that, but there's really never been any tie between the two, where you could definitively say we found something here in Antarctica that directly ties to something in North America. I found it. And it's just about as undeniable a visual piece of evidence as you could ever hope to find. It's that good. And it has to do with a question I've had for a long time about this. There's this idea called the Columbian Exchange. When Columbus and the Europeans began exploring the New World, they brought with them a lot of things, including diseases: chickenpox, influenza, malaria, measles, smallpox, yellow fever. Did the native inhabitants of this hemisphere have no diseases of their own? Did they have no immune system of their own? And if so, why was it so particular to this hemisphere? Meaning the Europeans explored Africa, and we didn't know of any such thing happening down there. The Africans traded with Asians. Middle Easterners traded with Europeans. And they all mixed, and one didn't kill off the other by their simple presence. Why was it so particular? Well, a story came out about these archaeologists that have verified this Florida's Mound Key as a location of an elusive Spanish fort. Now, I looked at how they outlined this, and I thought that's a very strange way to outline it. They've got it in 6 sides, but when you really look at the region, it's in 5 sides. So I thought, maybe I'll make a video about that. That's not the thing I found. This article, and I'll link to it, talks about the Calusa people. Now, the Calusa people were very different than other Native Americans of the time. They were extremely advanced. They built live fish water courts. They built these channels and basically traps for fish that they raised. They didn't just go out and fish and take what the ocean gave to them. They were very specific in shape, and they basically herded fish into these things in ways where they couldn't get back out, and then they had basically an unending food supply. It was something that coastal Native Americans didn't do on the West Coast, didn't do on the East Coast. These people, the Calusa people, were incredibly, incredibly advanced. Now, this has been an allegation of the civilization in Antarctica, that they are way ahead of us. Now, if this group of people had the intelligence and the ability to do this in the 15th and 16th century and before, where could they possibly have come from? Now, here is the part that's jaw-dropping. I went to Mound Key, and decided, you know what, I'm going to take a look at this place. And first of all, I'll be honest, I didn't know where Mound Key was. There's keys all over Florida. It's in Cape Coral and Bonita Springs, this area. Now, this is probably one of the most unsung areas of Florida, the southwestern coast. This area down here, in fact, this little place called Marco Island, might be the single most exclusive community in Florida. They don't like visitors, and it ain't cheap, because they're the last stop, and it's stunningly beautiful. I mean, it is absolutely gorgeous down here, even by Florida standards. But just up the road a ways is this place called Mound Key. And when we look at Mound Key, even more so, using the map, it does seem to have 5 sides to it. And that alone would probably be video worthy. They have an archaeological site there where they have dug up the walls of this ancient Spanish fort. And believe it or not, the Spanish actually learned something from the Calusa people. People talk about everything going the other way, about how we brought this and we brought that. They learned how to survive down here. They even discovered a new type of mortar that these people had used. It's ash and ground shells and sand and a couple other things. And it was an amazing mortar. Crushed shells, I believe. But here's the thing that's going to blow your mind. So I'm looking at Mound Key, and something catches my eye on a key just south of there. I want someone to explain this. Out in the middle of this island, look at this clearing. Notice anything familiar? Why would, just randomly, out in the middle of some key in Florida, the trees just by themselves decide not to grow in a certain shape? And not just any certain shape. That's, for me, way too much of a coincidence. I think this was some type of an homage to their home, to where they were from. Something they used to teach, perhaps their children. It's clear as a bell. I mean, right down to the detail of the bays, the inlets, even the peninsula. They didn't want to lose their history. They didn't want to lose where they came from. And so they used some kind of technology, some kind of engineering, maybe is a better word, to create something that would last. Create something that future generations could look to and go, oh, this is who we are. This is where we came from. I'm just sitting here staring at it and just am dumbfounded of all of the things that have been missed, that archaeologists haven't seen. This one, right in front of their eyes. Everyone's eyes. And never having been acknowledged is just beyond the pale. The Calusa people did end up dying out. And there's not very much left of the record. What is left of their record is actually in Spain. And a lot of those records have been held very tightly, guarded by the Spanish. And I would really like someday to be able to have the wherewithal to go there and study and learn what these people knew and their history and how they ended up being so much more advanced than the rest of the Native Americans of this continent. Building fish traps is one thing. Building a weir is one thing. Netting fish is one thing. Building water courts smacks of Atlantis, to where fish would just swim in naturally, and then you could use different engineering tricks to lower and raise the water level to trap them, and then you could just harvest them as you would corn or soybeans, and just do this over and over again, never having to really worry about food. See, that's the big kicker with civilization. When you stop having to worry about fresh water and worry about a regular supply of food, that's when you can start making advances in other areas, because most of your time isn't spent searching for food, finding fresh water. You can do other pursuits, especially living in a temperate area like Florida, where you wouldn't have to worry about, like the northern Indians, for example, how they would live in the summertime had to be very different than how they lived in the wintertime. Down here, that wouldn't have necessarily been the case. That area of Florida is pretty warm, more warm a little bit, but in the summer than in the fall and winter, but not markedly enough that it would have changed the way they went about their day. So, I will give you this coordinate, Mound Key, Florida. This is actually technically a place called Charlie Key, but I think it was all the same place 600 years ago. Like, share, subscribe.